All right, hi guys. I'm Dr. Trent Hippard, coming live from Restoration Chiropractic here in West Knoxville, Tennessee. And today we're going to do our Health Knox series on the 5 negative effects of physical inactivity. Now, if you're first time or a repeat watcher, whether it's live or the replay later, go ahead, comment, like below, let me know that you're there. If you have any questions throughout this whole video that's live or replay, go ahead, post your questions below. I'd love to interact with you. Otherwise, I'm going to jump right into our series here on the 5 negative effects of immobilization, or 5 negative effects of physical inactivity. Now, every Wednesday this month, I've been gearing a series. Our series is on Move by Design concepts and strategies to help you utilize for you and your family not only better spinal health, but overall health, because we have to start thinking just that spinal health is overall health. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about the 5 negative effects of physical inactivity, and hopefully you can see my screen behind me as I pull up some of these things. So the first thing we're going to talk about, and there's more than one category. I'm going to talk about joints, bone, muscle, and ligaments, and how physical inactivity impacts those negatively. Now, first off, when we talk about joints, it actually shrinks the joint capsule. And so each of the joints in your spine, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a joint here. There's a capsule that surrounds it. And that capsule actually shrinks over time because it's not being utilized, it's not moving properly. So again, think of it, if you don't use it, you lose it. So it makes sense that that joint capsule actually shrinks. And we also see, in a ligament standpoint, that it lowers the failure rate or the yield point in terms of that ligament to hold that joint stable. So what does that mean? Over time, if it's not moving properly, the ligament itself isn't as stable. So this moves you into a higher risk of injury and disability. So those are first two negative effects. Also, we're going to take a look at bone and muscle. And with bone, we see a decrease in bone density. This makes sense because of Wolff's Law. So Wolff's Law is basically when you place a force through any structure in your body, especially the skeletal system, that stress actually imposes the body to make it stronger. So that's why we say density or more solid in terms of your bone or skeletal structure. When you don't move and move properly on a regular basis in terms of physical activity, and of course spinal health, which I'll talk a little bit about later, it decreases and actually leads to osteoarthritis, and osteoporosis, over time. When we talk about muscle, what happens is we see a decrease in muscle mass, and I don't think that's a surprise to a lot of people, but what could be is that we see that a decrease in muscle strength 20% per week when inactivity is not happening. Now, I'm going to cover some really great insights and strategies to meet those requirements of how do we incorporate more physical activity into our daily lives that make it sustainable, and so that you can actually meet this requirement, stay healthier for you and your family, but also protect your spine and your spinal health. Now, one last thing I want to talk about when we talk about joint capsule shrinkage is this, that there is actually irreversible changes that we see from research and evidence after 8 weeks of immobilization. And then there's a caveat to that, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it's not true irreversibility. We can actually reverse it depending on most cases and how damaged that structure of that spine or joint is actually in the spinal structure. So with that said, let's go back to understanding that this is all about activity with movement, right? So when we think of that, we think of exercise, but also we want to think about spinal movement, spinal structure, because your spine was actually made to move. And if it's not moving properly, it is actually creating these negative effects that are impacting not only your spinal health, but also your overall health for you and your family. So the best way I can report or make this connect better for you is think about your dental health. It's the same concept for your spinal health. You want to keep that in check. That's why you go to the dentist annually or a couple times a year to make sure things structurally and the soft tissue that surrounds it is healthy. And if it isn't, then you address that through strategies or treatments that the dentist wants to do. It's no different when we're talking about spinal health. Think of these as spinal cavities. If they're not moving properly, they're creating some type of joint shrinkage. We're talking about ligamentous failure. We're talking about bone density decrease, and also muscle mass and strength that is lower over time. And the interesting thing is you don't feel these things happening, just like you don't feel a cavity in your tooth most of the time. It's there for weeks, months, or years on end before it actually proposes itself as a symptom, a sign, or a collateral problem. Okay, so let's jump into the next slide here that I have, which is going to talk about neuronutrition. And what is neuronutrition? So when we talk about the neuronutrition, yes, it's the nervous system, but we want to think about it this way. Let me zoom in for you. So we talk about food. So when we talk about food, when you take in food, yes, this applies to movement because your body needs fuel, right? Not only on a glucose level or ketones, but also understanding how much of that energy level is actually being utilized. If you're not moving physical activity on a regular basis, number one, you're not utilizing a lot of this glucose that's in your muscles and in your liver. And what does that mean? Go back to my other videos on Health Knox series all this month that talks about insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, and also chronic stress response. When you have extra energy, it creates toxicity in your body, and then of course it decreases the cell receptors for you to take up this glucose. Okay, number one, when we talk about food, what I want to talk about here is omega-3 fatty acids. Yes, they're important for movement and spinal health, and why is that? Well, when you take in the substrate omega-3 fatty acids, they drive down inflammation. When we have a joint that has lower inflammation, it moves better. If it doesn't, it increases inflammation because it's a nutrient that's expected and essential, and if you're not providing it, there's some type of inflammation, whether low grade, mild, or severe, depending on the person and their lifestyle, that's creating stiffness, that's creating some type of inflammation, attracting scar tissue. So there, we want to talk about food, right? Oxygen. This is going to pertain to aerobic activity, so anything that creates activity for your lungs and your heart to work together to exchange oxygen and get those nutrients flowing through the body and getting them out in terms of CO2 as you take in oxygen. So this is very vital not only for spinal health, because spinal health is creating organ systems and organ health, and of course your brain function. This is what we're talking about. Brain neurons need these nutrients in terms of neuronutrition. So when we're talking about neuronutrition, we're talking about food, we're talking about oxygen. And then the biggest main essential nutrient that you need in terms of brain neuronutrition is the stimulation of movement. And 90% of the stimulation that goes to the brain for neuronutrition comes through movement of your spine. And if your spine is not moving properly, what do you think that is creating for you and your health? All right, if you have any questions, again, put your comments below. This leads me into that next question, which I kind of already presented. Imagine if your spine was deficient in joint movement, okay? So we had a joint that's not moving properly, whether a lot or a little. This is what we call joint dysfunction. Let me ask you this. How healthy do you think your brain and your body are going to be? Now that depends on the amount of deficiency. And this is where you need to know, just like your dental health, how do you know how healthy your teeth are, your dental health, unless you actually get it looked at and measured? Same concept with your spine. So regardless of that, to answer this question, in general, it's not as healthy as it could be. So if you have joint dysfunction, a joint or more that's not moving properly, we have brain dysfunction to some degree, deficiency-wise. Now, I want to talk about the next slide, which was going to tie in how this ties into the brain itself. Pull up my slide here for you. So when we talk about movement of the spine, it actually stimulates parts of the brain. And the part of the brain that we're going to talk about is this. It's called the vermis. It's here highlighted in red or pink. And this is the part of the brain, the cerebellum, that helps with the stress reduction pathway. So when you move properly in terms of exercise, different types of exercise, aerobic, anaerobic, resistance training, but also think if your spine is moving properly along with exercise, it's stimulating this part of the brain and it reduces the stress load that's on your brain and your body, which is equivalent for better cognitive, how you think, better behavior for kids, better healing and restoration. So when we decrease our movement deficiency, right? So we're not getting enough movement. That's when we call that movement deficiency syndrome. So we're moving more. We have proper spinal health and movement. That decreases the unhealthy adaptive physiological response, which decreases your metabolic acidity in your body and chronic inflammation, which then sets the stage for you to have better restoration and spinal health, but also overall health. Now, if you have any questions, please let me know by liking, commenting below, whether you're watching this live or in the replay. And join me next month as I do my Health Knox series that's going to be all about Think by Design and strategies to help you to manage your mental emotional stress and how that ties into your physical health. And also, don't forget, we're going to talk about brain and skeletal or spinal health. Now remember, until next time, when it comes to your health, you're worth it. Make it a great day.